the opposition has left out, like, pretty much half of the case that they brought out at the proposition, with the main point that we see, which is a huge moral imperative that we owe to the whole Pacific. What I'm going to be talking about in my speech today is 4 points. The first point which I'm going to be talking about on this moral imperative is going to be a quick one, because it's largely been untouched by the opposition, and they kind of say, well, we're going to, we think we're going to concede this point on, giving aid to Nauru as well. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about a big point of whether it's like principally right to give aid to countries where there is a corrupt government in place. Thirdly, I'm going to be talking about, will this aid actually help? And we say, of course it will, and the evidence shows that. And fourthly, we're going to talk about counteracting the influence of China. So firstly, on the moral imperative, what we said quite clearly is we said, look, the Pacific is poor, the Pacific is suffering from climate change is our fault, therefore we have a duty to give those countries aid. That was our point. We said whether you're in Fiji, whether you're in Nauru, whether you're in Otago or Niue, we don't care. We think we have a duty to help out your people, therefore we are going to give aid. And we have enough money, we're rich Westerners, you don't because your islands are sinking. We say we win that point, Mr. Speaker, and that's all I'm going to talk about. Secondly, I'm going to move on to this point of whether, principally it's wrong. And the first thing I want to say about this point before I get into actually rebutting it is it's quite symbolistic. It pretty much says, well, on the proposition, we think it's quite dangerous if you base your aid not on results, but instead whether you think it's right or wrong, because we think the purpose of aid is to lift the living standards of the people that we give it to, not to live in your own principle facade and have sit on your moral high horse and think whether what you do is makes you feel good or not. So firstly, we think that it's not a huge important point in its own right. But secondly, I'm going to rebut it anyway, because what we say is that people understand that aid is there to help out poor people. They know it's not some symbolic gesture to military governments. We say that there's a huge difference between giving aid and giving military supplies to one's army. We think that people are smart enough that when we give them aid, they think, oh, well, they're giving them aid to help out the poor people. People don't interpret it as saying, oh, they're helping out that government. The only people that do that are ones like silly opposition teams in debates like this, Mr. Speaker. And we say people don't see it as approval. The government doesn't accept it as approval. They know it's for aid for those people. And we say that on the issue of whether it's right or wrong, we say we're not principally standing up for those governments at all. And we're not supporting them. And we can say that as well while we give the aid to those poor people. We say, look, we don't like what you're doing in government, but we're still going to help out your people anyway. And I think that's a good message to send. Thirdly, I want to talk about, will it actually help? And this is a very important point. And basically, basically the first opposition speaker pretty much got up here and made this huge assumption that aid is some big donation to corrupt governments. He absolutely had no inclination or understanding of how aid actually works in the real world, Mr. Speaker. Is what we say is aid is not a direct donation to the government. There are things like sending people to build bridges, and there's all sorts of things, or giving them food. If it was a direct money payment to the government, no one would give it. It would be effectively a government donation. That's not aid, Mr. Speaker. We say that doesn't happen. Another point, as we say, is that who are the people that are giving the aid? Who's the one that has the influence? It's us. When we give them the aid, there are a lot of conditions and things you can put on them, on external things as well, like trade and stuff. We say we've got a vast influence on where that aid goes. Hannah was quite practical and quite moderate when she said, well, look, there are going to be some situations where there might be some which leaks into the government. Look, if you're going to employ a Fijian person to build a hospital, maybe his income tax might get into Bainimarama's coffers. But we say, look, if that hospital that you're building is saving thousands of people's lives, we say we don't care about that little bit of income tax that goes to Bainimarama, because we think if the results show, then it should be okay. And that's why we think that aid will work. And that's, as we said on our first point, because it's going to give these results, and because the countries are in such poverty, we need to give that. Next, I want to talk about this issue of China. And the thing about China is, is that, like, China, in the current status quo in Fiji and in Tonga, is that China is basically the sole donator of this aid. And we say that, you know, since the West is not giving aid to countries like Fiji, or not, you know, not giving it to Tonga, or not as much as they could, what we say is that, you know, that's very bad. Now, the only we gave you a huge point on this and why we don't want China to have settlements. The only rebuttal we got effectively was, well, you know, China takes their fish stocks. You know, they don't like China anyway. We don't think that's good enough, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to go over this point again just to cement it in. What we said is that if China is the only country giving aid, or is the biggest country which is giving aid, we say that means China has the on-off switch on the aid, Mr. Speaker. We say that that gives China influence on whether they give that aid or not, and we say that gives China influence on the policy and direction of that nation. China is corrupt, China is a dictatorship, we don't want the ones having that influence. Now, if we're actually going to rebut the opposition and talk about fish stocks, I'm more than happy to. Because the reason that people are pissed off about fish stocks, the reason that China's exploiting it, is because China has the influence to exploit those fish stocks, because they can take away their aid if, you know, Bainimarama doesn't give him his fish. That's how it works. It's like, we'll give you this aid, but we want to plunder your fish reserves as well. That point falls to the proposition, Mr. Speaker. And we say that if aid was coming from us instead, we are good people, we would not do that. We would not do that at all, because obviously we care for the fish environment of Fiji, and we say that if it's more aid is coming from us, we say that in that country, people are going to actually, like, those people are actually going to like us more, and we say, you know, people are going to like us more because we're not destroying their fish reserves, and we think that's good. Next was this point on tit for tat, and it's like basically what the issue was here. Is that it's going to like make this kind of scenario where we've got two competing superpowers, and you're going to suddenly give this perception that it's West versus China. We say no. In the places like Fiji and Tonga, the current perception is that it's only China, Mr. Speaker. It's only China that are the ones are giving aid. And we don't want that perception that China is the big Pacific superpower. We don't know, or hyperpower, I think that's the correct term if there's only one of them. And we say that we don't want China to have that perception. We need to show the Pacific, not just the corrupt regimes, but the people as well. We are giving aid as well. Not only that, we're not destroying your fish reserves, we're doing it in a good way, therefore you like us. And we think that's a good thing as well. So for these reasons, firstly, this point that we've won, because they haven't imposed us on it, that we have a moral imperative to have every single Pacific nation. Secondly, that we say that the symbolic point of whether we're supporting these countries, we say they're not. We say there's a difference between aid and, like, you know, giving military support in the form of like political help outs with your mate. Thirdly, we say that it actually does help, that aid goes to the things like building hospitals and things. It doesn't go to government donations like the opposition wants to say. And fourthly, we're going to counteract the influence of China, because that's a bad thing. We win this debate.
Paul, do you want me to go?